First, most important, I'd like to welcome my mother. She's right there. And you have to thank her for everything, okay? Yeah. And truly grew up in an enlightened environment, and you know, very lucky. So that's her. Then tonight is just a free-for-all, and you don't have to be relevant or anything, and just ask any question you feel like, and that's all. We'll do it for about an hour and a half, something, and I don't care what it's about, and you're welcome to ask anything you like, okay? So it doesn't even have to be about this course or anything. All right, so any Dharma question you have. Can you hear me okay? Should I stand up? No. Okay. All right. If you can't hear me, you know, make some kind of sign. All right. Can't hear. Okay. Is there a mic?
Yeah.
Oh.
Keep your head.
Not behind. Okay. Is that better? Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. No? More? Hi, Richard. We'll stand up. Okay, so just go ahead. Anybody? Nope? Okay, we'll stop. Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about 1 hour of meditation, does that include your sadhanas?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're memorized, how about that?
Yeah. Anila asked me if I say that you need an hour of meditation a day, and I mean specifically for seeing emptiness directly, okay? For reaching Samden Dhamma Nyado Michome, which is the meditation level you need to reach to see emptiness. And actually, Chujang Rinpoche mentions it in this chart. He mentions that level. If you look at it, it's somewhere in there. I don't mean sadhanas. I don't mean preliminaries. I don't mean tonglen. Okay? I'm talking 1 hour a day of jogom. We're going to go over that tomorrow, but jogom means fixed meditation on an object. So, meaning going into a deep state of meditation. A good sadhana, and I say good, okay? A good sadhana practice is a shargom, where it's a movie. You're playing a movie in front of your mind, and you're seeing many, many different scenes go by, and many different emotions, and many different beings coming and going, and disappearing and shrinking, and withdrawing and going out, and you know, that's a shargom. And technically speaking, you can develop shamatha about a shargom, but it's very difficult. And I'm talking jogom on a single object where your breath is very, very deep, and your mind is very, very deep and fixed on a single object. So, you know, a lot of people are trying to cover their other practices during Michael Roach's hour. No, okay, you know. So it's kind of deceptive, you know. You need like 15, 20 minutes for the preliminaries, maybe 10 to 15, and then you need an hour of straight jogom. And if you have to do sadhanas or something like that, that's shargom, and maybe you do it in the evening or something. I find that it takes less concentration to do a shargom than a jogom. You know, less concentration to do a review meditation and a sadhana meditation than it does to do a deep, focused meditation on a single object. But that's what I'd say about that. Okay, I'm talking deep meditation. Okay, on a single object. Yes.
So would that object that you choose be different from an object that you would have in a sadhana?
I'll repeat the question. Okay, the people doing the taping said I have to repeat the question. So. Yeah, she said, does that mean that it would have to be a different object than one of the objects in the sadhana? No, you could use one of the parts of the sadhana, you know, and personally that's what I would do. I would go like if you're doing an 11-step sadhana, go through 4 or 5, reach the part of the sadhana that you'd like to do shamatha on. Like you could stop at the refuge part and do shamatha on the refuge visualization and like that. So yeah, you could incorporate it that way. And that's very typical. If you're doing Vajrayogini, you could stop at Ngangde Yinde and do that mental recitation there and focus on the meditation at that point, especially the Sharchen Dzogrim. And if you don't know what all these are, then you're not supposed to know, okay? But yeah, you could do that. Very, very proper, probably more efficient. Go through the Shargom, go through the sadhana, stop on one of the practices. There's normally like 10 or 11 kirims there. And then you stop on one of them and practice that. Practice the same object for like 1.5 to 2 months. Okay, stop in the same place for 1.5 to 2 months. And then it's not bad if you go quickly through the rest. And it's not bad if you do your minimum commitments for all the other sadhanas you're supposed to be doing, you know. Focus on one. And don't break your commitments, you know. Do your minimum commitments for the other commitments you have, but focus on one sadhana and focus on one scene in one sadhana for 1.5 to 2 months. And then you must vary it after that. You dry out after a month or two. You know, it gets as clear as it's going to get. And then move on to something else to keep some variety in your meditation. I personally find it that way. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
What's the best object for shamatha?
He said, what's the best object for shamatha? I mean, the classic answer is an image of a Buddha. And I think, you know, there's the Coke Classic, and then there's all these other kinds of Coke, like Cherry Coke and Diet Coke, and I mean, what they call Choki Tuku. You know, all these images like Tara, everything else is a Tuku, meaning an emanation of Lord Buddha. You know what I mean? An emanation of the Buddha. And then Choki Tuku, which means, you know, classic emanation. Emanation classic is with the long ears and the bump on his head and golden body and all that. I mean, I think a lot of Americans actually find that image difficult to relate to, you know, and they feel more comfortable visualizing Tara or Manjushri. I mean, the reason that Tara and Manjushri emanate as these beautiful, sexy deities is that the only reason is that you find it more attractive. That's their shtick. That's what they do. They're supposed to emanate in a way that you would find attractive. So it's not at all improper or a mistake to pick the one that appeals to you the most, even just physically, and concentrate on that one. I think you know, the classic answer is visualize Lord Buddha, and I think a lot of people find it a lot easier to relate to Tara or to Manjushri or something that, you know, and then people say, which sadhana am I supposed to do? You know, I can't do that sadhana well because I have 5 other sadhanas to do. But the point is to pick one called, that's what yidam means. Yidam means pick the one that you feel the closest connection to, the closest automatic comfortable connection to, and concentrate on that. Because remember that, you know, whichever, sadhana means to reach that deity. So the word sadhana means to reach that deity. So if you reach one, you reach all of them. You see what I mean? It's not like you're going to have to go back and start over again with Yamantaka because you've reached Vajrayogini already or something like that. When you reach one, you've reached all of them. They're all just different forms of the same guy or girl. Okay, so you got to remember that. You know, when you're like torn, I have 15 sadhanas to do. I'll do 3 minutes on each one. You won't achieve anything. You won't be able to do it. Focus on one that you feel most attracted to. Concentrate on reaching them, which is the meaning of sadhana. And then when you reach them, you'll meet all the other ones. They'll be there also. You know, when you reach them, they'll be there. Reach has 2 meanings in the word sadhana. One, it means to come into contact with that being. And later it means to become that being. You see what I mean? So you reach them in both senses. And And you can't do it if you're like trying to do 15 at once, you see? Reach one, and you will reach the others automatically. You don't have to worry about it. So do your minimum commitments for 5 sadhanas, you know, which is typically like, I don't know, a certain number of mantras, short mantras. They're called Nyewe Nyimbo, means a short mantra. And then focus on the one that attracts you the most. And don't be embarrassed and don't feel like it's wrong to focus on the one that you find most attractive. Because that's why they emanate that way. They're supposed to hook you. And that's their shtick. That's what they do. That's why they appear in different forms. Otherwise, they would all look like co-classic Buddha, you know, and they don't. Okay, and don't be shy about it. You know, don't have this. What do you call it? I don't know. It's some Judeo-Christian thing or Western civilization thing that it's somehow wrong to be attracted to your God. You know, in Buddhism, it's cool. You know, you will be like them. You should want to be like them. You should be attracted to them, even physically. You know, that they look beautiful to you and you'd like to be like that. And their physical beauty reflects the purity of their mind. And you can work at it, you know, in the sense that I would like to become like them physically, which would mean I have reached their mental state also. You see what I mean? Through reaching their mental state. And that's fine. So concentrate on the one that attracts you the most. That's why they go to all that trouble to emanate all those different bodies, you know. It means each one has fits a different personality. You have to find the one that fits your personality, okay? Like that. Yeah?
I have a question about polkas.
Yeah.
I don't think there were any before the 15th century, were there? Did they kind of come along to help gain support for the monasteries after the popular lamas died who were bringing in all the goodies?
She said, I thought tuku was a thing, like a system that developed in Tibet after a great lama died, and then just because of the wishes of everyone, and perhaps even because of like worldly considerations, that the system of tuku came about. Tuku, we've studied it, right? I think, well, we were in Arizona, we did it. Means emanation of an enlightened being, and 1 millisecond after you reach enlightenment, you know, there's 4 bodies of a Buddha. In the first millisecond of enlightenment, you only have 3 of them, because one of them acts as a cause for your tuku. Tuku means the ability to appear on millions of planets as millions of different people at the same moment. And it's not, according to Buddhism, it's not impossible that every person you've ever met in your life was the emanation of one being, and that it's all a big Truman show. And they're all trying to help you. You know, it's a big plot to get you enlightened, you know. Or that some percentage of the people around you are already enlightened. Those would be tukus. So the word tuku literally means a physical manifestation of an omniscient being which appears spontaneously. They don't have any premeditation. They don't think, I have to send out this tuku, this tuku, this tuku. They appear whenever a being is ready. And that's a quality of a Buddha. When you get to be a Buddha, one of the reasons to try to be a Buddha is that you will gain that ability to appear all over the United States, in every little town, sitting on a bus next to somebody who needs you at that moment. And that's a quality, that's one of the goals of your life, has to be that you want to become like that. Then in Tibet, the word tuku came to mean reincarnated lamas were called tukus, on the theory that they were emanations of one being, right? So, you know, there's no problem for there to be 2 karmapas at one time. The Little Buddha movie was right. You know what I mean? No problem at all for there to be multiple bodies, and it's happened a lot in the history of Tibet. So technically speaking, they are emanations of an omniscient being who maybe got enlightened 1 million years ago. Okay. Now, I was walking around Chujang Rinpoche's stupa at the winter debates in Ganden, and he came barreling around the corner of the stupa on his bike and ran me over, and it hurt a lot, you know. And I was like getting up and dusting myself off and saying, I'm sick of these little spoiled tukus around the monastery, you know. Everyone treats them like they're gods, you know, and they find out at about age 10 that they can terrorize everybody, and everybody will say, "Oh, thank you, Rinpoche," you know. And you know, and I was like really getting fed up with this thing, you know. And you hear the older geshis grumbling, you know. I had to wait 3 years for my geshi exam because 6 tukus got pushed ahead of me because they were tukus and they've never read a page of scripture or something. You know what I mean? There's a thing in the monastery, there's this feeling, you know. And so I was going through one of these mental affliction attacks about this little tuku. And then I dust myself off and he goes into his room. He lives on top of the temple, you know, he lives on the 2nd floor. I've never been in his personal quarters. Then I get this message, Rinpoche wants to see you right now, you know, and I'm like, okay. And they take me upstairs and, you know, I go through all the motions, I bow to him, and I'm still remembering the bicycle, and he's like 9 or 10 at that time. And then he says, Mako, you know, I gotta tell you something. You really have some problem with anger and getting mad when people hurt you, and you need to study some Lamrim, you know, and I have this Lamrim for you, and I want you to read it over a few times and, you know, work on that, you know. and you never know, you really never know. You know, so I've come to a point, don't think of tukus that way, really. They're always, I think it's one of the most holy things about Tibetan Buddhism, and later in your tantric practice you'll appreciate it, that even in the monasteries, in the sutra monasteries, in the non-tantric monasteries, that you decide that this person is enlightened and you have to deal with it. You know what I mean? You have to relate to them, and oftentimes they will seem to be very impolite or very lazy or very goofball, and then suddenly you see them for what they are. I mean, it might take years, and then suddenly one day you see them for what they are. So never think like that about tukus. They're amazing, you know. And I don't mean to say they won't seem like little spoiled brats sometimes, but then one day they'll show you who they are, and on that day you're like, oh, oops, you know. You know, and I've seen it happen many times, so don't doubt it. Don't doubt it.
Steve Siegel, who at the age of 40 was going to be a explain that one.
She said, what about Steven Seagal, who they decided at age 40 he's a tuku? I mean, if you need another tuku story, I'll tell you, okay? I get this phone call from this lady in New York. She says, I have the Dalai Lama of Mongolia here sitting next to me. And I'm like, yeah, right. And then she says, he wants to talk to you. I think you should talk to him. And I'm like, I'm busy, you know. And she's like, oh, no, you should talk to him. And I said, okay, I'll talk to him. And so I get on the phone and I'm talking to him and I say, you know, what's your name? And he says, Jetsun Dampa, you know. And I say, well, I never heard of that, you know. And then he says, I said, so you're the head Lama of Mongolia? He says, yeah, I am. And then I said, what's your monastery? And he says, I don't have a monastery, you know. And then I said, well, what do you mean? You know, are you a monk? And he says, no, I'm not a monk. And I'm like, but you're the head Lama of Mongolia. He says, yeah, I am. And then I said, well, I'm just being polite at this point, you know, like, are you from Ulaanbaatar or where are you from? He says, I've never been to Mongolia. And, and I'm like, oh, you're the head of Mongolian Buddhism, you're not a monk, and you've never been to Mongolia. And he says, right. And then I said, well, where do you live? And he says, I live down near Belakopi, you know. And I say, oh, I'm from Saramay. He says, oh, yeah, 2 of my sons are in Saramay. I said, you have sons? You know, he says, yeah, they turned out to be classmates of mine, you know. Now I'm placing him, you know. He's this old man in this village who's been there his whole life, and then somehow he sold this lady, this poor, unsuspecting American lady, is believing that he's the head of Mongolian Buddhism, you know. And I'm like, I'm very turned off. I'm very, like, disgusted. And I say, well, you know, I hope you have a good trip, and I'd like to meet you. I'm too busy, and good luck to you, and talk to you later, you know. And then I went home and told my Lama about this imposter, you know. And he says, you made a big mistake. And I say, what do you mean? He says, he is the head of Mongolian Buddhism. You know, and then there's this long story, he can't go back. There's a political problems, you know. And when I went to Mongolia, from the airport, when we drove to Ganden Monastery, the other Ganden, the Mongolian Ganden, there's this huge palace by the side of the road. And I'm like, wow, who lives there? And they say, that's Jetsun Dampa's palace, you know. And he's stuck in India, and we're trying to get him here, you know. And I'm like, so I think you have to be really, you never know. You know, who knows who Steven Seagal is? You know, you never know. Better not to judge anything, you know. Just leave it alone. You never know. God knows, you know. It'd be very, very, typical for an enlightened being to emanate as a nice, handsome movie star in America. Instead of being abnormal or strange or inappropriate, it would be very typical for them to do something like that. It would be very typical Buddha behavior to act like that. Do I know he's a tuku? I have no idea, you know. But I say be careful with it and suspend judgment until you're sure either way. And don't go, you know, throwing yourself down on his feet and saying, because Joe Schmo said you're a tuku, you're a tuku. You know what I mean? Wait and see his qualities. And if he's a great teacher and he's explaining Dharma well, and then that's, you know, then throw yourself down on their feet, you know, and suspend your judgment either way. You know, also if you go around saying he is a tuku, then you're also making a judgment which I think is inappropriate. I think you have to judge the person for his teaching or her teaching, you know. And it's the same with Jetsun Ma in Maryland, who's a hairdresser from Brooklyn with 2 kids, and she's the holder of the Nyingma lineage of blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, right, you know. And then when I met her and I taught at her center, I was extremely impressed and extremely, I gained a lot of faith in her. And I think you have to be really careful with that stuff. That's all I'm saying. Just be careful with it. And don't judge either way. I also don't trust people who say, oh, such and such a Lama is an enlightened being. I say, how do you know? And I say, I like him, you know. And I say, you know, is that all? You know, is there any other, you know, the main quality of an enlightened being, of all the qualities they have, is to speak the Dharma. And that's their most important quality, and that's their most important activity. So if they're teaching the Dharma properly and well and accurately, then I feel comfortable to have faith in them. And, you know, and until I see them teach, until I know them well, I would suspend judgment. You know, be careful. You can really collect a lot of bad karma that way. Okay. Yeah.
Can you explain pramana from a Prasangika viewpoint?
He said, can you explain pramana from a Prasangika viewpoint? Pramana means sema, and sema means valid perception. Okay, so a couple things to say about sema. Valid perception. The definition in the lower schools is sadhu milue rikpa, which means a fresh, unmistaken perception. When you get into the higher school, Prasangika, they say it's just milui rikpa, which means an unmistaken perception. And they cut out the sadhu part. The reason they cut out the fresh, in the lower schools, a memory is not a valid perception. Like, just because you remember something doesn't mean it's correct. They don't count a memory, something that you remember, as valid as your direct physical perceptions or your direct logical perceptions. So a valid perception can either be with your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, or body, or it can be with your logic. You know, that when you come to a conclusion logically, that's as good as seeing it with your eyes. And those are all sema or pramana. So that, but there's a difference in the schools about whether memory is a valid perception or not. So that's the first thing to say about it. Second thing to say about it is that there's a reason why we say valid and not correct. And I'll give you an example. Like, I used to be a VP in this big corporation, and I would make decisions about millions of dollars of diamonds. And I remember one time I made this huge wrong decision, you know, which he never let me forget, my boss. And it was, I was in India, I was busy, I was on the phone, I told somebody to buy 24,000 carats of diamonds. and it was supposed to be 14,000 carats of diamonds. And you're talking 100,000 stones. And he went ahead and bought them, and then suddenly my boss didn't have any money left, and he's like, that was a big mistake, you know. And I said, no, it wasn't a mistake. He said, why not? I said, I did a calculation. Actually, I did a calculation, and it was that we needed, at that day, we needed 24,000 carats of diamonds to meet the needs of Christmas rush, you know. And I calculated it, and the calculations were valid. They were justified at that moment, okay? It happened that they weren't correct, okay? So there's a distinction between justified and correct, okay? And that's why we say valid perception rather than correct perception. A tsema, or a pramana, means given the information at your disposal, you see something a certain way. So we can say your mind or your perceptions made a valid decision about what this object was, given the information that your mind had available to it. Okay? But they're wrong. Okay? The first time you have a truly correct perception is when you see emptiness directly. And shortly after that experience, you become aware that every single perception you have ever had in your life was mistaken. And that every moment of your life, as you experience the world around you, you were misunderstanding it, and you were misinterpreting it, and it was not the way you thought it was. So all throughout your life, you've had some kind of validity to your perceptions, because that's the best you could do with your wimpy mind. Okay? But if you had really understood the nature of the thing, you would realize that that was wrong. So that's the story on pramana. Okay? Yeah.
Could you go back to the conversation before this one about the tropos?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain that in an emptiness context? Now, here's my question. This person may be taught, or maybe people think this person's a tropo, maybe they see them that way. But if you don't have the karma to see them that way, how can you make a valid, what is a valid judgment? It's just going to depend on whatever you're projecting. Is that true?
Yeah, she said, explain the tuku thing with regard to emptiness, okay? And that's true, that what is a tuku base level from his side or her side? What is a tuku? A tuku is 4 limbs and a torso, okay? Really, that's all the information your eye is giving you to your brain, you know? So if this person turns out to be an emanation of an enlightened being, a tuku, ultimately it's only because you have the virtue to see them that way. Okay? Ultimately, that's the only thing that makes them a tuku in your eyes, in your experience, is that you are so virtuous that you have the good karma to meet an enlightened being in your life. And then another person might come up to them and to see the same 4 limbs and torso as being a schmuck. Okay? And so who's right? What is he really? It's the question on Friday night in Seichen Ling at the Unitarian Church. That pen, you know, was this cylinder from its own side a pen or a dog treat? From its own side, which one is it? Yeah, you have to say neither. Okay, it depends on how many legs you have. You know what I mean? If you're a 4-legged critter, and you walk in here and I say, hey, you know, look, you'll probably more tend to chew on it than write with it. Okay, you perceive it as a dog, as something to chew on. And if you're a human and you come in here, you perceive it more as a pen. But you can't say that one being is more right than another. If you think about it, that cylinder is coexisting in 2 realms at the same moment. It exists in a dog's realm, and it exists in a separate world called the human realm. And they're both experiencing this cylinder in a different way. So it's very interesting to reflect on the fact that there are 2 realms which are totally different, can coexist in the same 50 square feet at the same time. 2 totally different worlds are existing there. There's the world as the dog sees it, and there's the world as the human sees it, and neither one is more correct than the other, you see? They both have equal right to be there because some being is there who's experiencing that way. Okay? So, is a truku the same as this pen? Is a truku the same as this room or this place? Of course, quite validly. They can appear to a person who doesn't have enough virtue as not being a truku, as being, some big hunky movie star who's kind of dumb, and then they can appear to, they can validly appear to a person with great faith and great virtue as being an enlightened being, and help them that way. And they can appear to themselves as one or the other, depending on their own virtue. Who's right? You see, it's neither one of the above. The same as the pen. That's the emptiness of trukus. Okay. So suppose you reached a state in your own personal life where your heart was so pure that you saw everybody around you as a truku. Consider the possibilities. That is actually the goal of Buddhism. So are you kidding yourself? Are they really trukus or not? Is it really a pen or really a dog treat? Yeah, it's neither. So it's quite possible that you could be in a third realm, you see? There could be a third realm going on here of people who are very, very virtuous, who have kept their book well, and are perceiving this whole event as some totally different reality, And that is the emptiness of Steven Seagal, okay? And it's not a joke, and that's the whole way to go to heaven. Is it related? Okay.
All right. Can you comment on the truku from his or her side?
Yeah, no. By the way, no contradiction, nothing strange, nothing improper to say that Steven Seagal may be perceiving himself as a schmuck, as a plain old normal person, and he's quite aware that all this is bunk, and he's not an enlightened being. And you see, it doesn't matter. If I have sufficient virtue to see him as a truku, he will function to me as a truku, and he will guide me to an enlightened state. You see, no contradiction there at all. It's not at all impossible that you're in a room full of people, because of your keeping your book well, you're perceiving them as angels, and they are validly, but not, well, they are validly perceiving themselves as normal people, and there's no contradiction there. And they can say to you, good evening, and you hear it as some Buddha giving you a private instruction. That's the meaning of the word kadampa, okay? The meaning of the word kadampa is a person who's reached a level where everything a person says to them, dampa, looks like the Buddha's talking to them. They say, Kieran's always doing that. Winston's kid, like he's just a kid, right? And I walk up to him, I say, Kieran, how you doing? And he looks at me. The first thing is like, are you keeping your vows well, And then he goes, like that. He's always doing this, Like, if you did, And whether I see him that way, or whether I see him as just a kid who's waving his arms, and how he sees himself are three totally different things. And there's no contradiction that two realities can exist in the same person at one time any more than this has to be a pen or this has to be a dog treat. That's the emptiness of all objects. That's the only reason we can get enlightened in this life. That's why Tantra can work. Tantra's effectiveness depends on the emptiness of this cylinder, and on the emptiness of 4 limbs and a torso that we call Steven Seagal. Okay? Yeah. Sure? Okay.
How do you know that you're actually hearing what this person on your side is actually saying?
She said, how do you know that you're hearing what this person from their side is actually saying? Don't forget the thing where the Buddha was sitting under the Buddha tree, the Bodhi tree, and the last shot of the demons in this life, they take these spears and they like throw it at him. And then all he perceives is the shower. They turn to flowers in midair in his perception, right? There's a big teaching on emptiness there. That was really true. They perceive them as weapons, and they are really intending to do harm. They want him to bleed, you know. They're throwing these things. And then he looks at them and he sees these people throwing flowers on him. Congratulations, you know, great job. And there's a lesson on emptiness there. Okay, you don't know what they perceive themselves as saying. You see what I mean? How they perceive their words is one thing that you will know the day you become enlightened. Okay, you can read how they're perceiving their words, but if you hear those words as unpleasant, you can be sure there's only one person you can blame, and that's you. You know, if you see the swords as swords, that's your problem. You don't know how they're perceiving, and it doesn't really matter. And don't think that it's not real because you're not hearing what they intended, okay? Because nothing's like that. No object in the world has its own self-existence. No object in the world exists from its own side. Don't think something weird is going on because you hear something amazing and they're just telling you something normal. That's the way emptiness works. That's the way your whole life has always been. And there's no contradiction there. The whole world could be calling you a schmuck, and you're hearing them singing your praises because of your karma. That's reality. It's never been anything else. Don't think it's like weird or something like that, or it's somehow unreal because of that. That makes it real. That's all it's ever been. Okay? And there's only one person you can blame if things goes wrong, and there's only one person you can pat on the back if things go right, and that's you. Okay?
What's the difference between that and delusion?
What's the difference between that and a delusion, okay? In highest prasangika, right, they discuss the idea of, how to see it. There's a discussion of the idea of mistaken perception, you see what I mean? And that gets back to your thing about pramana, you know. How do you know, suppose you're in a mental hospital and you think everybody is God around you, you know. What's the difference between that and a person who's been practicing Tantra so well that they really do see everybody as a deity? In prasangika, they don't draw a distinction between those two states. They are both equally valid. You see what I mean? It's very interesting. The other schools try to draw a distinction between a state of mind, a tsema which is correct and a tsema which is incorrect or something like that. And Prasangika says, no, there's no such distinction. The problem with the guy in the mental hospital is that the causes for him to see that or her to see that are not stable. They weren't created by virtue practice. They weren't created by proper tantric instruction and proper tantric training and proper understanding of emptiness, and it will wear out. You know, it's not occurring through their wisdom and their understanding of the emptiness of the people around them. And sooner or later, very often, it always turns into a nightmare, you know. They go up and down, in and out of this state. The fact that they have that delusion for a short time is because of some virtue they did in the past. But they don't understand it. They don't understand the emptiness of what's going around them. And then they can't maintain that perception. You see what I mean? Tantric heaven means you have prajna paramita. You have the perfection of wisdom. You know that it's all your perceptions, and you're playing on that to keep it going. And that's enlightenment. You know? Yeah.
But even when you perceive emptiness directly, it's unstable. You can fall back. And so you're much higher along on the path there. So that is something that could be extinguishing. So it seems that the distinction is not valid. You know, the distinction is the same. You perceive it that way. You believe you've seen the emptiness, but you're not stable.
Yeah, when you reach the direct perception of emptiness, Tonglam, path of seeing, has two parts. The first part is called Parche Melam, the direct perception of emptiness. And then the second part is called Jetopyashi, which is the next 24 hours. And you see all these understandings that are not the direct perception of emptiness. When you come out of your first direct experience of emptiness, you go back to seeing all the objects around you as self-existent. And you cannot stop yourself. But you know you're wrong. So before that, you were seeing everything as self-existent, and you didn't know you were wrong. After that, you still see everything as self-existent, and you do know you're wrong. And so one of the 3 mental afflictions, which is only 3 out of 84,000 mental afflictions, are forever eliminated at the path of seeing. One of them is the intellectual belief that what you're seeing is correct. You see? So forevermore, you will never believe what you're seeing. And that's what illusion means in Buddhism. That whole period, from that moment you come out of the direct perception of emptiness until the day you become enlightened or become an arhat, that whole period is called gyumatabu, meaning illusory. Illusory in the sense that things still look self-existent and you realize that's your problem. You know, you realize that you're wrong when you see them that way. Okay? And even after the 8th Bodhisattva Bhumi, at the 8th Bodhisattva Bhumi, you eliminate the perception of things as self-existent. What are you supposed to do on 9 and 10? You know, what's left to do? Okay? One of the things is a purification of the potentiality for seeing things as self-existent. Meaning, during Bodhisattva levels 9 and 10, things stop appearing to you as self-existent. Okay? At Bodhisattva level number 8, you stop seeing them as self-existent permanently. And that's actually Mahayana Nirvana, is when you reach Bodhisattva level number 8. And then you still have to go through 9 and 10 to get to enlightenment. Okay? So yeah, there's a stability problem when you're, right after you come out of the path of seeing, yeah, you're very weak in your direct perception of emptiness. And you have to keep reminding yourself and going back to it. And it's the reminding process that lets you reach nirvana. And still, all of that is projection. You know, the fact that you have to live in a mind which is still not stable is due to your past karma. And that's also a projection. Okay? And that's a little touchy, okay? There's a place in the Diamond Cutter where Subhuti says, you know what? I'm a Drachomba. I'm an arhat. I've reached nirvana. But if I thought I was an arhat, I wouldn't be an arhat, would I? You see what I mean? And what he's meaning is, when he has this pleasant experience of his own mind as being totally free of any mental afflictions. He has this very, very wonderful state he's reached where he cannot have jealousy anymore, incapable of getting irritated at anyone, incapable of feeling anxiety, you know, incapable of being upset, incapable of feeling jealousy. This is what an arhat is. That's also a projection. His mind is empty as Steven Seagal, as empty as this pen. And his good karma is forcing him to think that it's clean, and therefore it is clean. And that's very touchy. The difference is he knows what's going on. He knows that he's making it happen with his past karma. And so he knows how to keep it going. And that's why after you get to Buddha paradise, you don't have to go out anymore. You cannot come out of a Buddha paradise because you know how to keep it there. You just keep doing good deeds and you keep seeing it that way. And you know you're only seeing it and you're quite happy to be there. Because that's all anything else ever was. Yeah? Okay. You in the back. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. No, the lady behind you. Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
I have a kind of beginner question about karma.
Yeah.
You, at one point, had said that some things that happened to you that brought you kind of eventually on a path to Buddhism. And if there are events that happen in someone's life, like, you know, their entire family dies in a car accident, is that, and that causes them to ask these questions, is that karma or because of things that happened in the past, or is that a gift to open?
I understand, yeah. She said that once I was describing how death in my family had gotten me to be into Buddhism. So the death itself seems to be an unpleasant thing, but the fact that it pushed me to become a monk, for example, is a good thing. You see what I mean? So I think what you're saying is that a good karma or a bad karma? You know what I mean? Gampopa was married before he met Milarepa. And then one of the great lamas of the Kagyu lineage. And then his wife died. And his wife's uncle came to console him. And they're sitting around the table having tea, you know, and Gampopa says, "It's so wonderful my wife died, you know. Now I can go practice all the time, you know." And the uncle got angry and threw dirt in his face and said, "You heartless guy, your wife had just died, And I think the question is it a good karma or a bad karma? When you're in the business of deciding whether a karma is good or bad, the definition of good karma, it's very interesting. You see, what makes a sin in Buddhism? And what makes a good deed in Buddhism? You see what I mean? What's the difference between a chet and a mitzvah? What's the difference? You see, is it a bad deed when God said it was a bad deed? Is it a bad deed because Buddha said it's a bad deed? How do you judge whether an action is karmically positive or negative? The definition of good karma in Buddhism is any action which, after a ripening process or a boomerang process, brings back to you a pleasant experience. Period. That's all. That's the only basis of all Buddhist ethics. Does this action karmically come back to you as an experience of happiness or pain? And if it comes back to you as an experience of happiness, it's good karma. No matter what deed it is, you see? And if it comes back to you as pain, it's a bad karma. So if you take the case of a car accident, the feelings of pain and of separation and of loss that occur then are a result of bad karma. Why? Because they hurt. I mean, you see, that's the only thing that makes a bad deed in Buddhism. If it comes back to you as a feeling of pain, it must have been from a bad deed. Okay, and then going into a monastery, finding a way of life which saves your life and becomes the thing that you reach ultimate happiness by doing this thing. That's a good karma. So we would say that the pain that you felt after the car accident was a result of bad karma. The renunciation you felt, and it pushing you into a religious way of life that eventually brought you ultimate happiness, that's a result of a good karma. Okay? And we call it a mixture of good and bad karma. Like that. Okay? Like that. Yeah. Okay.
When do you know where you are? Like, obviously you have a direct realization of emptiness, and then and you know that is unmistaken, and then from that point on, like if you're on the Bodhisattva Bhumis, do you know where you are in it from that point onwards, and do you just not have a clue until that happens? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Petra's question is this. There's 5 levels of spiritual realization. Before you reach the first level, there's millions of years of they call pre-path realizations. Like you can have, and these are primarily the 3 trainings of ethical living, concentration, and wisdom. But you can have heavy experiences of those 3 trainings even before you reach the first path. Okay? There's a whole process before you reach the first path. The first path is reached when in this life you're truly tired of suffering. You're fed up with it. You have a direct decision that you don't want to live like that anymore. Okay? Live like what? Very simply, you can say it that you reach a point where you realize that every relationship you ever had is going to fail and collapse. Any possession you ever get is going to be torn away from you. Any family or friends, anything you get like that is going to be ripped away from you by circumstances. Your own body is a time bomb. It's going to kill you eventually. It's just a question of when. And your own mind is in a state where even if you had the nicest girlfriend, the best car, the best lama, the best mind, the best everything, you would still go through this thing where after 6 months you'd be dissatisfied. People always ask me, Geshe Michael, come stay in California. We'll take good care of you. I say, no way. When I visit twice a year, you appreciate me. If I stayed here after 6 weeks, you'd start to think, maybe he doesn't teach that quite right. After 8 weeks, you'd be like, I wonder why he doesn't teach it that way. After 3 months, you'd be like, I wish he would go back to New York, And this is not a function of the Lama. This is a function of your own mind. You see what I mean? That's a benchmark of the samsaricness of your own mind, you know? And the Lama didn't change in those 6 months. You changed, you see? And the human mind is incapable of being happy. In its present condition, samsara is. Suffering is the fact that your own mind can't stay happy for more than a few days about anything. And then you want something else, you know what I mean? So, by the way, you know when you're keeping your book well, when that process starts to change, you know? You'll see that you become less dissatisfied with the people and the places around you and your own mind. You know, relationships start to become more stable. Your interaction with other people becomes much more. It seems like it would be possible to have a relationship and not have it collapse in 2 weeks. You see what I mean? Or 2 months, because your mind is changing. You see what I mean? So a nice benchmark of your success in your practice is this happening less to you? You know, is this dissatisfaction cycle happening with a longer term, you know? Okay, like not every 2 weeks, but every 4 weeks or something, you know what I mean? And then this is an indication that your mind is getting more pure. Okay, so what were we talking about before that? Oh, how do you know where you are? Yeah, that's the first path. Okay, when you get tired of that cycle, you know, I don't know how many boyfriends or girlfriends you have to have before that happens, you know. I mean, it must be a certain number. But at a certain point you realize that you can't be happy. You're not capable of it. And something always screws up. And then when you start figuring that out, that's renunciation. Okay? Second path, understanding emptiness intellectually. Culminating in the understanding of how you are projecting everything. Third path, seeing emptiness directly. You knows you there when you're there, okay? No question. Never any question in your mind. I mean, yeah, as you said, reaching the third path, 20 minutes in the direct perception of emptiness, no question. You know, I mean, at that point you really know where you are. And absolutely no doubt about it. People come to me and say, I think I saw emptiness. I said, what happened? They said, I was, you know, meditating and it felt like I was sliding off a boat and then there was this dark thing and then I felt like I won with the whole universe. Then I saw this green light with some gold and then I came out of it when my mom yelled at me. And they said, did I perceive emptiness? You know, I said, if you're not totally sure, then definitely you did not see it. You see what I mean? Every Arya who ever existed knows in the few minutes after the experience that they have seen emptiness directly and that they are an Arya. And there's absolutely no question about it. So you know when you're there. Do you know as you move up through the Bodhisattva bhumis that you're moving up to the Bodhisattva bhumis? I think at that stage you would know. How are the Bodhisattva bhumis defined? They are defined by the extraordinary practice of the 6 perfections linked with wisdom, linked with the perception of emptiness. So, you know, giving, ethical way of life, not getting angry at people, effort, joyful effort, and then those are the first 6, and then the last 4 are those extra 4 perfections. Going up to the bhumis is when you gain an extraordinary level of those 6 perfections, and then the 4. So I think pre-path, before you reach the first path of getting fed up, I don't know if there's a lot of benchmarks there. Yeah, you might not know where you are at that point. But I think, and I think even when you get real renunciation, you may not be aware that it was happening. You see what I mean? You have deaths in your family. You have a major separation from your partner or something. You get a serious illness, something like that. You reach a certain age, and you realize that it's going to end soon. That's why all these old people come to temple in New Jersey, you know. I live in a Mongolian community. The only people who come to the services are over 60, you know. And so all those events would, I don't think you might not know, you know, on a certain day, oh, I reached Soklam, you know. I reached the first path. But your behavior would start to change. You would be less interested in the world, and you'd be much more interested in your study, and much more interested in meditation. So I think you'd have those external indications, but I don't think you'd know if 8 o'clock on this date I reached Soglam. But your behavior would start to change. You would start to be much more interested in practice and meditation and much less interested in family life or things like that. You know, your priorities would start to shift radically. And normally it takes a very tragic event of some kind or something like that. Normally it takes some wake-up call. I read this thing where people only change the part of their hair after someone dies in their family. You know, people comb their hair, especially men, always the same way. And then they figured out that once or twice in a lifetime, somebody will change their hair radically. And it's directly related to someone dying, or they get fired from a job they had for 10 years, or some tragic thing. And renunciation is the same, you know. So I don't think you would know, but your behavior would start to change radically. And it might happen a year after those events, or 2 years after that, or something like that. Okay? Yeah?
Could you please explain where bodhicitta fits into that? Is bodhicitta the gateway to the Mahayana, and you get renunciation and bodhicitta, and then you're on the path of...
Yeah. She asked, where does bodhicitta come into the 5-path system? Okay? There's when you reach the first path, which is getting fed up with life on your own side, okay, and I do emphasize that it's probably in some kind of relationships with people. When you realize that your own mind cannot let you maintain a relationship with another person peacefully, that always your own mind is screwing things up, and your own mind is making it collapse, and your own mind is making you dissatisfied, and your own mind is making this thing seem bad after it seemed so good 6 weeks ago, you know. When you realize it's your own mind at work, and then you have the scriptures say that if you then extrapolate to other people and you say, you know, I used to walk up and down Fifth Avenue. My office was on Fifth Avenue. And it goes uphill to Central Park from the 40s. So you can look up the Fifth Avenue and see the bobbing heads of tens of thousands of people coming up and down Fifth Avenue. And this is Bergdorf Goodman, Saks Fifth Avenue, Harry Winston Diamonds, all these guys, you know. These are the cream of America. The people walking up and down the street have money, you know, and you see their heads bobbing up and down, and then it dawns on you at some point that every single one of them is deeply unhappy, you know, and there's this shock, you know, and the more of them you meet, the more convinced, you know, you don't have to meet a lot of them, and then you just realize none of them is any happier than anybody else. And it's this shock that you get into, and to realize that specifically that the actions they are undertaking to make them happy are making them very unhappy. And that's what's making them unhappy, is very, it's like earth-shaking. Like you wake up one morning, you realize that everything they're doing to try to be happy is exactly what would make them unhappy, karmically. See what I mean? And it's like a big shock in your life. And when you get to that stage, the scriptures say, when you're able to think that other people are as unhappy as you are, meaning, you know, you're not going to commit suicide tomorrow, something like that. But I mean, you can't be satisfied with whatever you get, whether it's a person or a position or any other part of your life, your physical appearance. After a short time, you're unhappy again. It's your mind, you know, and when you realize that other people are all like that deeply, when you're able to take that feeling of the first path and apply it to other people, you've reached bodhicitta. So according to all the scriptures, if you reach the first path and understand that it applies to everybody else, you have bodhicitta. They happen simultaneously. You're on the Mahayana 5 paths. If you don't feel it towards other people, you're on one of the 2 Hinayana 5 paths. Okay? In practice, when you reach Tonglam, the direct perception of emptiness, and right after that, you come down out of it, you have an intense experience of bodhicitta. And you're on the first bhumi. So you can be we'll debate, okay, mushi musum. Do they teach you that in Italy? I don't know. Not yet. Okay, mushi musum is, let's discuss the, what do they call it, permutations. It's a permutation debate, okay, mushi musum. Papa yena chansi bikyabe. Okay, which means is everybody who's an Arya a bodhisattva? Has everyone who's seen emptiness also become a bodhisattva? I'll say Papa yena chansi bikyabe, which means everyone who's seen emptiness directly must have already be a bodhisattva. Papa yena chansi bikyabe. And you say Tamadu, which means no way, you know. It's not true that everyone who's seen emptiness directly is a bodhisattva. Papa yena chansi makata. Are you telling me it's not true that everyone who's seen emptiness directly is a bodhisattva? We do a reconfirmation thing in debate. Are you telling me it's not true that everybody who's seen emptiness directly is a bodhisattva? Duh means that's what I said. Okay. Okay. And at this point, if you're the person sitting down, you are furiously thinking of an example that proves what you said. Okay? You're trying to stall every second you can get, you know, because you're stuck, you're in a corner.